Today, we're going to look at stupid influencers that recorded their deaths. From an influencer obsessing over camera angles on a dangerous moss-covered cliff to one chasing the perfect wave shot on jagged rocks, ending an adventure in the dumbest way possible. It was June 14th, 2015. The limestone cliffs of Zhangjiajie National Forest Park rose through morning mist, their moss-covered edges glistening with overnight rain. By noon, one of those edges decides the fate of a 27-year-old woman who had spent the morning arguing about camera angles. Britney Famro wasn't famous, but she had built a modest following, posting hiking content online. The Los Angeles native had moved to Shanghai 6 months earlier, teaching English part-time while building her content portfolio. Her social media showed carefully composed shots from Chinese scenic spots, always featuring her against dramatic backdrops. Other content creators knew her reputation, meticulous about shots, but frequently clashing with guides over creative control. That morning, Britney had hired a local guide for a waterfall overlook shoot. She had chosen the location specifically for the moss-covered cliff edge jutting above the falls. The guide later testified she arrived with detailed instructions, rejecting safer viewpoints from the start. He advised her more than once that the rock surface was slick from spray and recent rain, but she insisted the shot required standing at the exact edge. She spent nearly 3 hours directing him, moving rocks, adjusting positions, and critiquing his camera work with her phone. The cliff edge where Britney insisted on shooting extended roughly 8 feet beyond the main trail, slick with moisture from the 65-foot waterfall below. The park had installed safety ropes and warning signs, warning visitors not to cross beyond the marked boundary due to unstable footing. She stepped over both repeatedly, returning to the exposed edge each time the guide repositioned her. For 20 minutes, she shuffled backward while the guide held her phone, zooming as instructed. She wanted the waterfall and valley visible behind her, requiring positioning as close to the edge as possible. The framing demanded she move backward without looking down at her footing. At 12:17 in the afternoon, Britney took one step too many backward. Her left foot landed on wet moss at the cliff's absolute edge. The guide saw her foot slip, lunged to grab her, and shouted a warning, but could not reach her in time, dropping the phone in the process, then witnessed her tumble backward off the precipice. Her phone, later retrieved from a tethered waterproof case, captured her scream as she disappeared. The fall happened in segments. Britney dropped headfirst for roughly 15 feet to the first outcropping, striking the jagged limestone below. The impact redirected her body sideways, and she tumbled another 25 feet against protruding rock before sliding the final distance into the shallow pool at the waterfall's base. The force of the fall caused catastrophic blunt force injuries across her body. The guide screamed for help but couldn't safely descend the wet cliff. He called park rescue at 12:19 in the afternoon. Other hikers gathered above, several calling emergency services. From their vantage point, they could see Britney's body floating face down in the pool, her bright pink top visible through the mist. Park rescue teams arrived minutes later, aided by a nearby patrol that had been on routine rounds with rappelling equipment. When they pulled Britney from the water, preliminary examination revealed unsurvivable traumatic brain injury, multiple rib fractures, and fatal internal hemorrhage. She had died within moments of the initial head impact. Authorities recovered her gear, including the phone that had recorded almost everything. The footage showed exactly what the guide described, a content creator so focused on her shot that she stepped backward into empty air. Park officials retained the video as part of the investigation and did not release it publicly due to its graphic content. The park reinforced warning signage and installed additional barriers. It was June 18th, 2016. The morning air at a historic racing circuit outside Milan was thick with engine heat and burning rubber. Damon Kelsey, a 35-year-old automotive hobbyist from Portland, stood beside a gleaming Formula racing car, adjusting the mounted camera on his helmet for the third time. The track stretched before him like a ribbon of asphalt promising speed he'd only dreamed about. Damon wasn't a professional driver. He ran a moderately successful automotive YouTube channel focused on supercar experiences and track day content. His subscribers knew him for his enthusiastic reviews and willingness to push expensive machines to their limits. at various racing circuits. He'd driven Lamborghinis, Ferraris, and Porsches on tracks across Europe, but never anything like this. That morning, Damon had paid for a premium driving experience package that included 3 laps in a detuned Formula car with minimal professional instruction. During the technical briefing, the track engineer emphasized braking points and cornering speeds. Formula cars demand precision that supercars forgive. They weigh a detuned Formula 3-style single-seater, accelerate from 0 to 60 miles per hour in under 3 seconds, and require braking distances calculated at speeds exceeding 150 miles per hour. Damon interrupted twice, joking about camera angles and asking if the car could go faster. The engineer noted his casual attitude and reminded him that these vehicles offered zero margin for error. The engineer cautioned Damon against increasing speed on the 3rd lap, advising him to maintain conservative braking points. Damon acknowledged the warning, but insisted he could handle a faster run. By 11:15 in the morning, Damon had completed 2 warm-up laps, his technique visibly deteriorating in the corners. Telemetry showed inconsistent braking and poor throttle control. Despite this, he requested permission for a faster 3rd lap. The engineer reluctantly agreed, but radioed a warning about the first chicane's braking zone. Damon accelerated down the main straight, reaching 137 miles per hour as the chicane approached. He missed the primary braking marker and delayed hard braking until he was significantly closer to the chicane than recommended, carrying too much speed into the tight left-right sequence ahead. His wheels locked momentarily before he ran wide, the car rotating violently as it left the racing line. The Formula car spun twice before slamming into the tire barrier. The impact destabilized the chassis. After climbing the outer curb, the car lifted briefly and overturned before striking the tire barrier again. During the rotation, his helmet struck structural components of the cockpit, cracking the visor and partially dislodging the camera mount. The onboard camera captured disorienting, unstable footage. Brief interruptions in the recording, followed by fragmented images of the horizon spinning and debris crossing the frame as the car overturned and slid into the catch fencing. Track marshals reached the wreckage in under 90 seconds. The track medical car was on scene within 3 minutes, finding Damon unconscious and bleeding from his nose and ears. The force of the impact caused fatal chest injuries despite the protective driver cell. Paramedics began resuscitation while carefully cutting him from the twisted chassis, removing the steering wheel and harness and stabilizing his head and neck. Damon never regained consciousness and was pronounced dead minutes later. The medical examiner's report indicated massive internal hemorrhaging caused by blunt force trauma sustained during the crash, along with severe head and neck injuries consistent with high-speed impact. The accident received limited local coverage outside regional motorsport outlets. The track experience company suspended operations for 2 weeks while authorities reviewed safety protocols and driver screening procedures. Damon's camera footage was seized as evidence and held pending investigation, never released publicly. The engineer who conducted the briefing provided testimony confirming Damon's dismissive attitude and unsafe acceleration patterns. It was April 22, 2017. The private villa on Cancun's southern coast sat surrounded by mangrove lagoons, where brackish water concealed dangers. Ariel Montoya, a 30-year-old content creator from San Diego, crouched at the water's edge with her waterproof camera inches from a crocodile, which she'd been hired to feature in a promotional video for an exotic pet tourism company. Ariel had spent 6 years building a social media following around exotic animal encounters. She'd handled pythons in Thailand, swam with sharks in South Africa, and fed bears at wildlife sanctuaries across North America. Her Instagram showcased thousands of photos with dangerous animals, each post earning sponsorship deals that funded her lifestyle. She had no formal training in animal behavior or handling, but her fearless approach and willingness to get closer than others had built her reputation. Friends described her as confident and street smart, someone who learned by doing rather than studying. The villa's management had imported the crocodile specifically for wildlife tourism content. It was over 14 feet long and weighed approximately 900 pounds. Staff members had warned Ariel multiple times that morning about maintaining distance, reminding her that rescue poles and a boat were on standby but could not be used unless she remained at a safe perimeter. But she dismissed their concerns with a wave, insisting she knew what she was doing. By 3:15 in the afternoon, Ariel had positioned herself at the shallow lagoon edge, holding raw chicken to coax the crocodile closer for dramatic footage. The villa's groundskeeper, stationed 30 feet away, watched nervously as she leaned forward, camera extended. The crocodile floated motionless in murky water, its eyes just above the surface, fixed in her direction. Ariel stepped into ankle-deep water, focusing on her camera screen rather than the animal. The crocodile exploded from the water with terrifying speed. Its jaws clamped onto Ariel's left forearm, pulling her forward with sudden force. She screamed as the animal's weight dragged her forward into the shallow lagoon, her camera still recording as she hit the water. The animal maintained its grip, pulling and twisting as she lost her footing and was dragged into deeper water. The water churned violently as the crocodile released her arm and lunged again, seizing her torso. She struggled to stay above the surface as staff shouted from the shoreline. The animal pulled her into deeper water, submerging her completely. Witnesses reported seeing violent thrashing beneath the surface for close to half a minute before the water became still. The crocodile surfaced once, Ariel's leg visible in its jaws before it pulled her under again. The groundskeeper had immediately called emergency services, while other staff attempted to reach her with poles, but the crocodile's aggression prevented any intervention. A single handler had been scheduled but left the perimeter briefly, and rescue poles and a boat were not deployed before the attack. When the animal finally released its grip and retreated, Ariel floated face down near the lagoon's edge, her body showing extensive trauma consistent with a large crocodile attack. Paramedics arrived approximately 15 minutes after the initial call. They pulled Ariel from the lagoon. Medical examination revealed massive trauma to her left arm, torso, and both legs, with severe blood loss and drowning as contributing factors. She was pronounced dead at the scene at 3:47 in the afternoon. Mexican authorities removed the crocodile from the property the following day, relocating it to a wildlife facility. The exotic pet tourism company faced immediate investigation and suspended operations. Ariel's recovered footage was given to her family after the authorities reviewed them. It was April 12, 2015. The Kentucky River Valley stretched under clear spring skies, its limestone banks slick with recent rain, a deceptive beauty that would claim a life before the afternoon ended. Lindsay Harrow, a 28-year-old lifestyle influencer from Louisville, guided her rented chestnut mare. Lindsay wasn't new to horses. She'd grown up riding at a suburban stable, logging hundreds of hours in controlled arena settings and groomed trails. Her social media presence focused on accessible luxury experiences, weekend getaways, scenic outdoor activities, aesthetically pleasing content that required minimal technical skill but maximum visual appeal. This trip was part of a sponsored collaboration with a regional tourism board showcasing rural Kentucky to her urban audience. She'd rented a working ranch property specifically for its photogenic riverside trails, planning 3 days of horseback content. That morning, Lindsay had selected the mare from the ranch's stable lineup, choosing based on appearance rather than temperament. The ranch manager had suggested a calmer gelding, warning her that she should either take the calmer horse or wear a helmet, but Lindsay insisted on the photogenic chestnut. By 2:15 in the afternoon, Lindsay had filmed several segments along the river trail. The recent rainfall had swollen the river, its current moving faster than usual, churning brown with sediment. A ranch hand, working fence, repairs 200 yards upstream, noticed her riding while holding her phone, the mare's ears flicking nervously. The fallen oak branch lay partially submerged ahead, barely visible against the muddy bank. As the mare approached, it shifted slightly in the current, creating sudden movement in the horse's peripheral vision. The animal spooked instantly, executing a violent sideways leap away from the perceived threat. Lindsay's one-handed grip on the reins provided no stability. The mare's explosive movement launched her sideways off the saddle, her phone still clutched in her right hand as she fell 5 feet toward the river. Her body struck the water at an awkward angle, the back of her skull connecting with a submerged limestone outcropping. The impact caused severe head trauma, and she appeared unresponsive as she entered the water. She sank into the 3-foot deep water, her face submerged and her body caught against rocks and river reeds. The current pressed her against the obstruction, water flowing over her head. The phone recorded turbulent brown water and muffled splashing for only a few seconds before the feed cut out as the device submerged. The mare bolted upstream, saddle empty, passing the ranch hand, who immediately understood something had gone wrong. He ran toward the last position he'd seen Lindsay, reaching the riverbank within 90 seconds. He spotted her body partially submerged, motionless in the reeds, and immediately called 911. Emergency responders arrived 9 minutes later, pulling Lindsay from the water. Paramedics attempted resuscitation for 18 minutes, but found no vital signs. The medical examiner later determined death resulted from drowning, complicated by blunt force head trauma, with aspiration of river water occurring while unconscious from the initial skull fracture. The tourism board quietly terminated the sponsorship arrangement. Lindsay's family retrieved her phone and camera from authorities, but never released the footage. The chestnut mare was relocated to a therapeutic riding program, deemed too unpredictable for casual riders. The Riverside Trail was closed permanently 6 months later, its dangers finally acknowledged after one influencer's quest for content ended tangled in Kentucky reeds. It was August 23, 2016. The afternoon sun blazed over Seoul's Gangnam district, where sleek commercial buildings reached into cloudless skies. On the rooftop of a 10-story office complex, Lena Park, a 26-year-old drone content creator, was about to make a fatal miscalculation. Lena had built a modest following, creating aerial content for tech brands and local businesses. She wasn't famous, but she'd carved out a reliable income filming promotional videos and testing consumer drones for online reviews. Born in Busan, she'd moved to Seoul 3 years earlier, renting a small studio apartment and investing heavily in camera equipment. She'd recently landed a contract with a consumer electronics company to review their new quadcopter drone. Friends described her as ambitious and technically competent, though sometimes impatient. That afternoon, Lena had rented rooftop access from a commercial building's management company for 50,000 won. The space was popular with photographers and videographers, offering panoramic city views. Friends she was messaging said that she planned to film herself controlling the drone while simultaneously recording on a selfie stick, a technique she'd used successfully dozens of times before. Her new drone featured obstacle avoidance sensors and could reach speeds of up to 45 miles per hour in sport mode, which disabled obstacle avoidance. Commercial rooftops in Seoul's business districts are cluttered with infrastructure, HVAC units, ventilation systems, satellite dishes, and electrical boxes create a maze of obstacles across tar paper surfaces, while safety railings are often minimal or poorly maintained in older buildings designed before modern safety codes. By 3:15 in the afternoon, Lena had launched her drone and was holding a smartphone on a selfie stick with one hand while a belt-mounted controller rattled in the other. The drone began drifting toward the building's edge. Security footage showed Lena breaking into a sprint, trying to maintain visual contact while managing both the controller and selfie stick. What happened next unfolded in a matter of seconds. Lena's foot caught on a low HVAC ventilation unit she hadn't noticed while watching her drone. The low ventilation unit blended into the rooftop surface, partially shadowed and easy to miss while running, sending her sprawling forward at full speed. Her momentum carried her directly toward the building's edge. where a rusted safety rail stood well below standard rooftop height requirements. Lena's body struck the inadequate railing at hip level. The corroded metal bent backward under her weight, offering no resistance. The selfie stick, still recording, captured her tumbling forward into empty space. She rotated mid-air before impact. Her body struck the concrete alley below. A building security guard stationed near the stairwell landing witnessed the fall. He immediately called emergency services at 3:16 in the afternoon. Narrow alley access and confusion over the rented rooftop's official address slowed the ambulance. They arrived 12 minutes after the call. Paramedics found Lena unresponsive with no pulse. The medical examiner's report documented massive skull fractures, bilateral rib fractures, ruptured spleen, and catastrophic internal bleeding. Death had been nearly instantaneous. The building management company faced immediate legal action from Lena's family. Investigators found the rooftop's safety railings hadn't been inspected in over 8 years. Her drone footage was recovered, but never publicly released, deemed too disturbing by her family. Investigators made a sealed copy of the footage for evidence. The building installed proper safety barriers within 2 months, and Seoul's municipal government launched inspections of commercial rooftop rental spaces across the district. It was March 8, 2018. The jagged basalt platform along Sydney's southern coast had claimed swimmers before, but what happened that afternoon would be captured frame by frame on waterproof equipment still recording locally when rescue crews arrived. Cara Rehea, a 24-year-old surf content creator from Brisbane, had built a modest following posting coastal adventure pictures and clips of herself across social media platforms. She wasn't sponsored by major brands, but had secured partnerships with 3 smaller surfwear companies that paid her enough to travel the Australian coastline producing content. Her profile showed hundreds of posts: surfing at dawn, cliff jumping in Queensland, paddleboarding through sea caves. She specialized in dramatic coastal shots that showcased both her fit body and the raw power of the ocean. That week, Cara had traveled to Sydney specifically to film content during the unusually high spring tides. She'd surfed competently for 6 years and understood wave dynamics in open water, but had limited experience reading coastal rock formations, according to her friends, especially during tidal surges. They said that her goal was to capture footage of waves crashing against the notorious rock shelf at a popular beach. Content she believed would generate significant engagement. The afternoon brought swelling tide conditions with waves reaching 12 to 15 feet offshore. Coastal rocks at this location are composed of dark volcanic basalt with razor-sharp edges exposed during low tide, but submerged during high water. At approximately 3:45 in the afternoon, Cara positioned herself on the outer rocks, her waterproof camera secured to her left wrist via reinforced strap. She'd been there for 20 minutes, filming waves from various angles. Several beachgoers later reported seeing her move progressively closer to the water's edge, attempting to capture more dramatic footage as waves crashed closer to her position. Warning flags indicated hazardous surf conditions, and yellow signs specifically cautioned against approaching the rock formations during rising tide. The tide was on the rise, gaining roughly 8 inches per hour during the spring phase, and the afternoon swell produced frequent outlier breakers that outpaced the prevailing sets by 8 to 10 feet. At 4:02 in the afternoon, a beachgoer saw that Cara had turned to check her camera angle when a significantly larger breaker struck with force, throwing her straight onto the basalt shelf. Her chest impacted first against a protruding rock edge. She suffered severe blunt thoracic trauma, a fractured sternum, and multiple rib breaks, producing a flail chest, lung laceration, and massive internal bleeding that would rapidly compromise respiration and circulation. Simultaneously, her head whipped backward at an unnatural angle, sustaining a catastrophic high cervical spinal injury that caused immediate respiratory arrest. 2 beachgoers, positioned roughly 80 feet away, witnessed the impact and immediately ran toward the rocks. They called emergency services at 4:03 in the afternoon, but incoming waves made approach impossible for several minutes as surf rescue crews and paramedics were mobilized. Paramedics reached the scene roughly 10 minutes after the call. Cara showed no pulse and was unresponsive when paramedics reached her. She was pronounced dead at 4:19 in the afternoon. The medical examiner's report listed cause of death as combined traumatic asphyxiation from severe blunt thoracic trauma and immediate death from catastrophic high cervical spinal injury. Time of death was determined to be nearly instantaneous following impact. Authorities recovered Cara's camera equipment, the footage later used in safety presentations about coastal dangers. Local television ran a brief segment warning about rock shelf hazards during high tide. Thanks for watching. If you like these stories, click here.